Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this EOA webinar. This webinar today is going to be on the role of an employee trustee. My name is Oliver Smith. I'm from the Employee Ownership Association. And we've got a lot of people joining us this morning, clearly indicating the significance of this role in an employee-owned business. So delighted to welcome you all. How the event is going to run, I'm going to do a brief introduction. Then we're going to be joined by our panelists today, Ken Lindsay, Gemma Stimpson and James Grassick-Storrie. They're going to be sharing their insights and experiences in order for you to ask further questions about the role of an employee trustee, and hopefully from this event, take away something that you can take back to your organisation, whether you are in this particular role or you're looking to support a colleague. You'll get the opportunity to ask plenty of questions through Zoom. We'll all be familiar with how that works. Just post your questions in the chat feature and I will ask those as we go through. But before we get into our panelists, if we can go to the next slide, please, I'll just do an introduction regarding the EOA and what the opportunities are. So, if you've been to one of these events before and you've been a member of ours for quite a while, this will be quite familiar, but I do want to reinforce this message. We host events like this exclusively for our membership. We do this virtually, but also in person. If you go onto, and you'll get links fairly soon throughout this event and afterwards as well, our event page, you'll see events that are in person throughout across the UK and virtually that are coming up, all on different topics related to employee ownership. We equally of significance have an EO Learn programme. EO Learn is a portfolio of courses all related to employee ownership. If we can just go back a slide, please, that helps our members and also non-members understand more about the different roles and the opportunities there are at being employee owned. We have an EO Hub, which is our online platform. This is an opportunity for you to access 24/7 information, insights, and network with other people within our membership, of which we have about 3,000 people that use the platform. Additional to this, we have case studies, we have blogs, we have news. If you're ever interested in contributing to that and sharing your insights and stories with others, please do let us know. Equally, we conduct research, publish reports. The Knowledge Programme should be a familiar one to you. We introduce you to expert advisors, and we provide advice ourselves through our growing team. And very importantly, we campaign as the go-to place for employee ownership to represent the interests of all of our members when it comes to government and policy creation, to enforce that the EO sector can grow but also be sustainable for the future. If we can go to the next slide. So I mentioned about courses. We host a number of courses throughout the year, and this is just an example of some of them. There are more on our website that you can see. The next one that we have coming up is a new one. This is about communicating the EO transition to your team. So if you're about to become employee owned and you're thinking, how am I going to tell them? This is the perfect little online course in order for you to do that. Very popular, I think it's nearly fully booked, is another new course, How to Create an Employee-Owned Business. A huge topic, but one that's been summarised within this online course that we've got hosting in May. If it's full and you're interested in attending another one, let us know. The next one in May, related to this particular topic, it's our first ever course we did, and it's our go-to one. Ken delivers it for the EOA, and we run this pretty much every other month. That is how popular it is, how to be an effective employee trustee, and it's delivered online. And finally, another one that we've got coming up in May is if yourself or colleagues are interested in being an independent trustee, so sat on that trust board, but as an independent, if you've got insights and experience into employee ownership, this could be a role for you for the future. That online course is taking place, as you can see, on the 20th and 22nd of May. If we can go to the next one, please. But a big event that we have, if you haven't registered already, this is our encouragement to do so. So tomorrow is an event called People Powered Business. Probably one of the biggest events that the EOA has hosted outside of the conference for many, many years. Tomorrow, we will be launching the brand new look and feel of the EOA. Our new brand, which we are indicating to there, a new online platform that you'll be able to access, and a new EO framework that enables businesses to transition in a fantastic way, but also become a great employee-owned business. It's online. You'll be able to see a link in order to book for that if you haven't done so already. We strongly encourage you to join about the 400 people that have booked to attend already. If we can go to the next one, please. And these are the other events that we have coming up. I mentioned in-person ones. So we have one in London on the 15th of May, up in Edinburgh on the 22nd. We're going to Manchester or Liverpool on the 13th of June. And then we have a How to Become Employee-Owned virtual webinar on the 26th of June. Keep an eye out on the future dates, and hopefully yourself and colleagues can join us there as well. And another significant event that is coming up in June is EO Day. If we go to the next slide, this gives a build-up towards EO Day on the 21st of June. We provide you a campaign pack, and we'll be doing that very shortly in the next couple of weeks, giving you ideas about what you can do. The theme this year is Proudly EO. What a better way to celebrate your EO status and make sure that internal comms, but also shout it externally that you can be proud of your EO status. We'll provide you with information, but you can do whatever you like. Just do something and make the opportunity of being able to celebrate. So the 21st of June is the day for you to be thinking about for EO Day. So that's my summary of opportunities with the EOA. So we'll get into the meat of this event that we're hosting right now. So if we go to the next slide, I will introduce you to, well, they will introduce themselves very shortly, our key speakers for today. So Ken Lindsay, he's joining us as course director of How to Be an Effective Employee Trustee Director. James Grassick-Storrie, he's partner and Democratic Vitality Consultant Lead at John Lewis. James is with us, interestingly, to explain about the research that JLP have done about once you've finished the role of an employee trustee, what should you and also your organisation be doing and planning for that? As somebody who has gained a level of insight and experience and knowledge about a business, to then go back to the day job is a potential waste of talent. So what could an organisation be doing next? And Gemma Stimpson from Creed Communications is an employee trustee. Gemma's here to share her insights and experiences of being in that role. So when you booked, you posted loads and loads of questions about what you wanted to cover. We're looking at how to answer those questions through the challenges of the relationships you might have with a main board. How do you make the most of the role? And other key questions around how do you engage with employees and listen and demonstrate that engagement with the employees. So I'm going to ask a series of questions to them, and you'll get plenty of opportunity to post your questions to them as well. So if Gemma, James and Ken can join me on the screen, that'll be great. Fantastic. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Hi, Ollie. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
So we're going to start with some pre-prepared questions that provides a bit of an opportunity for the three of you to introduce yourself. So Ken, I'm going to start with you straight away. So basically, what interested you in employee ownership, and what has that interest in EO led to in terms of what you're involved in now?
Sure. I've got a curious background, sorry, for employee ownership. I'm poacher turned gamekeeper. So I've spent most of my career in the private equity world, which is the red and tooth and claw capitalist part of the world. I retired and then got bored, but I then stumbled across the employee ownership world by accident. And I found actually a sort of set of common values where it solved a lot of the problems and the things I just didn't like about the private equity and the extreme capitalist world. So I liked the values. So over the last several years now, actually, I've done a number of things in the employee ownership world, continue to do so. I've acted as commercial chair of employee-owned businesses. I act as independent trustee of a number of businesses. I do a lot of consultancy work in the EO world around governance issues. But I suppose the biggest time commitment, and one that's really enjoyable, was developing and helping the UA run the Effective Trustee and Employee Director course, which we sort of launched right at the beginning of lockdown. But over the last few years, We've trained about 120, 150 employee trustees a year, and it gives a fantastic window into the wide employee ownership world, the diversity of companies, the different types and sizes of companies, and the things that are worrying and concerning employee trustees and employee directors. So I guess that's probably the 1 minute version of what I do and what I continue to do, Ollie.
Thank you, Ken. You mentioned values right at the start. That's going to resonate with a lot of people. We'll explore that a little bit further as we go through. Gemma, if I could come to you, how did you become an employee trustee and why?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Gemma. I am project and operations manager at a company called Creed Communications. So we are a recruitment marketing agency based in Altrincham, just outside of Manchester, kind of specialising in employer brands, talent attraction, that kind of thing. So I've been at the company for 5 years now. And we officially became an EO on the 16th of August, I think it was, 2022. So nearly 2 years ago now. And our two owner directors, Simon and Caroline, kind of communicated to all employees throughout the whole setup process, kind of the reasoning for us to become an EO and all the benefits, etc. And when setting everything up, communicate to everyone that we would be having a board of 4 trustees, of which Caroline and Simon would be on, and an external independent chair as well, and then an elected employee representative. So they that kind of the process that we had for that was they sent through to everybody. Well, I should say we're a relatively small organisation at Creed. We've actually just hired a few more, so there's only 25 of us. So it's obviously, in comparison to James, we're a relatively small organisation there. So it was open to absolutely everybody in the organisation. They kind of communicated, sent all documents to everyone that our lawyers had kind of drafted up, detailing responsibilities of the role, obligations of the role, so everyone could have a thorough understanding before putting themselves forward to stand for election. And we had an election process in the December. I think we had 6 people that put themselves forward for that. All employees then had the opportunity to vote for which person they felt would be best placed to fill the role. So personally, for me, that was a really nice part of the process, as it was my colleagues who were actually nominating me for the role. So yeah, I've now been in that role since the 1st of Jan 2023. It actually only runs for 2 years. So we'll be doing that same process, the re-election in December. So I am able to stand for election again. But equally, as we're a much bigger team now, there's probably going to be a few more candidates who would like to take the role. Why I personally went for it, I put myself forward. Like I say, I've been at Creed for 5 years now, and I manage a lot of our operations internally. So it kind of just felt like a natural progression for me, a good add-on to my day-to-day job at Creed. And yeah, I've, like I say, been in it for 1.5 years now, and really enjoying it.
Thanks, Gemma. Noted that there's an election process at the very start, which is quite unusual for a lot of employee-owned businesses. They typically might identify somebody, and when I say they, strategic management team identify somebody who they think was right for the role. Creed just went in from day one, felt that they created enough understanding of what the position was, and then went through an election. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think at the time we were about 20 people, and I think probably some of the younger members of staff, the more junior members that hadn't been with us that long, probably felt a bit intimidated by it. So actually the 6 of us that went forward were more of the SLT and that had been there for longer. So we were all kind of relatively at the same level. I don't know if that will be the same, the next time we do the election. But yeah, it was a nice way. I think everybody felt like it was fair and everybody had that opportunity to take it if they wanted to.
Fantastic, thank you. And question to you, James. Do you just mind? This is really an interest. I've real interest in what we've talked about this for quite a while now. Can you summarise the research into what you refer to as offboarding and why the research has been conducted?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Yeah, so I'll maybe unpack the offboarding approach in just a moment. I guess in terms of what led me to that point is in terms of the role that I fulfill at the partnership. So as it said on the slide, I'm a democracy consultant, and that's part of a wider team that we call a profession. And that's, I guess, driven by the fact that beyond being employee owned, we consider ourselves to run the business on democratic principles, and have done since our settlement in the 1950s. So because democracy runs through every layer of the organisation, we're set up as a team to help deliver that on behalf of our partners. So yes, I'm a consultant, and what that means is essentially is to look propositionally at what we need to do for the future and for the now to make sure that we protect those democratic principles. So that can be an example being how does that integrate into things like leadership behaviours across the organisation, or recruitment processes, areas like that. And that's why that kind of leads me to a particular interest in learning and development as well. So within our organisation, from a democracy perspective, we have a council who have power sharing responsibilities within the organisation, and that's directed by the fact that we have a constitution, which feels quite unique and quirky as well. But we also have trustees that sit in various different boards in the organisation as well. So in terms of the offboarding approach, in terms of how we arrived at the need to look at this as an organisation, it became clear almost anecdotally that something wasn't quite right for our partners. And when I say partners, I'm meaning our employees. So when our partners were exiting elected roles, whether that be a trustee or a representative, that the exit felt really cold. And that after having such a rich and rewarding experience fulfilling that role, that there was really very little consideration given to what should come next, both for the individual and for the organisation. So did some research internally and externally to find out what best practice was out there, and the kind of Google summary is there wasn't a lot of best practice out there, so there's a real opportunity to try some things out, which I'll maybe unpack later on in this conversation today. But all of it took us to a place of essentially delivering a facilitated learning workshop for those that exited those roles. So that's the kind of the summary of how we got to it and what we did. But yeah, I'll maybe get a chance to unpack it a little bit more in the conversation.
You certainly will. Thank you for that introduction. So before we get into some meatier questions, a little bit of audience participation. A poll is going to pop up on your screen to help us gather some insights. 2 questions. The first question is, what is your main challenge relating to the employee trustee role? You can see the options there for you to click on. And the second one relates to what James has just been talking about. When you or your employee trustee has gained experience in the role and finished their term, who will on this call right now has a plan in place for the individual or the business to make the most of that experience and insight into the business? We'll hopefully bring some of this insight we've captured into the conversation that we're about to have. So if you can just respond, that will be appreciated over the next few seconds. And as you can see, questions have already been started, been posted down the right-hand side through the chat feature. So please do keep them coming throughout the whole of this event, and we'll try and get as many of those answered. But after this interview with our panel, we're going to break out into Zoom rooms, where you'll be going into separate rooms, and you can see James, you can see Gemma, you can see Ken, you can see colleagues from the EOA, and ask them further questions as well. So if I don't ask it on your behalf, you'll get the opportunity to do so afterwards as well. Okay. And yes, Jade, this is being recorded and we will share it with you afterwards. Okay, fantastic. Great, we've got some results there, which is really helpful. So we'll stop the poll now. That tells us not many people have a plan in place about what to do next, hence why we're doing this webinar. And quite simply, the top answer was understanding what I should be doing. Hopefully this webinar is going to answer some of those questions for you as well. Brilliant, thank you. So next questions to get into. So Gemma, I'm going to come to you. The section we're going to address here is about relationships and the operations of being an employee trustee. So can you explain how your trust board operates? Very practically, frequency of meetings, the agenda, who sits on the trust board, and just paint that bit of a picture, please.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, as I said before, we're obviously quite a small organisation, but So my role as a employee trustee director is to ensure Creed is being run in line with kind of best practice of being an EO. And I essentially kind of act as that conduit between employees and the trustee board. So there's 4 of us, like I said, Caroline and Simon, who are our owner directors. We've got a gentleman called Stephen, who's our independent trustee. He's from a solicitors, and he's great. He joins us and kind of gives us that external view on everything, without being heavily involved in the detail. Because obviously Simon and Caroline, our offices, because we're so small, they're very ingrained in the day-to-day, and we all kind of sit together in one office. So Stephen gives us that external view, which is great, and the external perspective. And then obviously myself. We meet 4 times a year. All meetings take place in our office. They're all face-to-face. We create an agenda for each one, kind of changes slightly each time, but the format is generally, we will run through kind of financial review, where we're up to as a business, all the financials, you know, GP, how we're kind of operating against target and where we want to be. There potentially could be an update on the director loan, and where that's up to. We have a section on any kind of specific EO updates. So generally, if anything has changed in the EO world, Stephen will generally give us an update on that. We also kind of discuss any events coming up, any events that we're attending, updates to any legal documents, any changes. We're also exploring B Corp certification at the minute, and how that can be an additional benefit for us as well. And then we have a section on employee representation. So this is the section that I will run. And then finally, like an AOB thing. So, and then we'll take minutes during it, and then they're all circulated afterwards. So my specific role within that is to, like I said, act as that conduit. So we have a couple of voice forum groups that I set up. So when I first came into the role, I set up a couple of groups, one for work environment, so kind of things like office decor, furniture, car parking, all that kind of fun stuff, and then a CSR group that would particularly discuss environmental issues, charity, all that kind of thing. Again, we did a nomination process because that seems to work well for us. And we asked for nominations from all employees to join the groups and kind of give a preference on which one they prefer. And we had that election process for them. And then once they were in role, we chose a secretary in each group, who essentially kind of runs the group, if you like. So they're the ones that make sure the meetings take place, they're diarising them, they chair the meetings, take minutes throughout, distribute any kind of actions to all attendees. And then the secretary particularly is in charge of pulling together any suggestions that are raised that they then want me to take to the board. So I created a bit of a framework for them to follow, just to make sure, you know, they're covering whatever the detail of the request is, what the benefit is going to be to Creed, what the specific benefit is to any employees, costs involved with it, and any ROI we're going to get back, a bit of an implementation plan, how long it would take to put into place, and any possible disadvantages of that. So they present any ideas to me, and then during those board meetings, I will run through all of them, and we have a bit of a discussion and review. For anybody that isn't in the Voice Forum group, and we obviously are a small organisation, and most people can probably just come to me direct, but I also set up a bit of a confidential suggestions box that we've got in our kitchen area. So anybody that doesn't necessarily feel like they want to approach me and ask a particular question, I capture kind of thoughts and ideas in that way as well.
Okay, fantastic. What I took from that, Gemma, structure.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got structure in place in terms of communication, going from the main board all the way through to the employees. You've got something in place, and importantly, the roles, understanding who's doing what.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the role of the independent trustee. Ken, can I come to you at this point? Because I know this is, you've done this role in the past, you've already talked about. Really briefly, what's the importance and significance of that role, and how an employee trustee can, lean on that individual effectively?
It's a good question, because I think there can be a wide variety of styles in being an independent trustee, but I think the core element of the role, the legal element, is to be a good trustee. And having an independent trustee means you're bringing someone on board who understands what the role involves, who understands what they should and should not be doing, and knowing what you shouldn't be doing in that role is as important as knowing what you should be doing. And I think they're there informally to be a support to the employee trustees. They're not a third party who comes in with lots of wisdom and grey hair and tells you what to do. A big part of their role is to work with, support and develop the employee trustees. If there are things that people don't understand because they've never come across them before, that's just part of the role of being an employee trustee. But hopefully your independent trustee has, and they can share their advice, their wisdom, their experience, and use that to help the trustees collectively get to the right decisions. They're not there to run the show. They're there to be an equal member of the trust board, but to support the other members as much as they are to be there themselves.
Excellent, thank you. Next question related to relationships. James, can I bring you in at this point, if you don't mind? So what do you see as the key factors from your reflections at JLP about forming an effective and maintaining an effective relationship between the main board and the trust?
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, I think one thing that I'd maybe encourage a bit of thought about is around how, so as an individual, you're clearly going to be facing into multiple different groups and holding lots of different relationships. I guess it can be the board, it can be other stakeholders, and it can also be the employees that you're essentially representing in some scenarios in terms of making sure their voice is heard. And something that might sound a little bit processy, but can be really helpful, is just how you can map out those relationships at the beginning. And beyond the functional role of understanding what some of these relationships are, there's something that I've actually discovered quite recently. It's a model called your personal boardroom, and you can Google it, and it's a really simple concept, but it encourages you as an individual to think about the people that you're surrounding yourself with, so that you can be at your best in the role that you have. Because by doing that, you can work out from a relationships perspective, have you got any gaps? You know, have you got someone in that circle of relationship who's challenging you and agitating you in a really positive way? But equally, do you know who the person is who will just make things easy for you and get things done and unlock doors and, you know, break through challenges? So I think there's something quite simple about just thinking about that in terms of what do you need across the relationships that you'll be having with all those different people in the role, and do you have any gaps? Do you fill that by going external, or, you know, by reconnecting with someone who you may have had a relationship with before that you don't have at the present moment? So just giving it that thought, and as I say, that mapping, just to almost tool yourself up from a relationship perspective, could be just a slightly different way of looking at it.
Thank you. So Gemma, can we come back to you? Could you build on that then? What are the reflections and lessons learned in managing those relationships that you'd like to share in your time?
Yeah, kind of a couple of lessons learned. One thing that is a little tricky for us being a small organisation is that our EO board essentially is the same as the operational board. Simon and Caroline obviously sit on both. So that can kind of present challenges. There's kind of blurred cross lines there. We were actually discussing this yesterday in terms of lessons learned and things that we're still working on. I said we're only coming up to 2 years in. It's still new for us. I think, you know, things are changing and we're still kind of finding our feet with it still. We have quite a young team who are less experienced in the working world and how kind of operating companies run. They're relatively new to both Creed and the working world. So what we tried to do was keep our approach really simple for them. They didn't need to know a lot of the other complexities of the kind of the deal, how the EO works, that how we pay the owners off, the structure, the financial freedom day, that kind of stuff. They didn't need to know that level of detail. It's kind of too far away for them. But everything else is shared with them. So how it benefits them, how they can help to shape decisions for the future of Creed, and the financials specifically. Creed have always been very, very open and transparent with all of our employees. They share financials quite regularly. We have like a get together probably I think it's about 3 months, where the directors will sit and show you the figures, and we don't hide anything. So actually the transition from us to an EO, it didn't feel like there was major change there. For any new starters we have now, we run a specific EO session with them during their induction week on really trying to show the positives, why we became an EO, the benefits of it, what it means to them in their particular role. And we try to celebrate it and refer to it in as much comms as possible. I think from a personal perspective, one kind of challenge I'd say maybe I found, this is very relevant to me and my particular role, is there's maybe an element of people not understanding my role. So because I'm also in charge of things operationally, I can sometimes get dragged into conversations that shouldn't really include me, that aren't EO related issues. You know, it's kind of, you really need to be speaking to your line manager about that. So I think that's probably, I'd say, one of our biggest issues internally being a small company, is that there's kind of blurred lines, I'd say, with some things.
Multiple hats. That a lot so far. Great. And Ken, finally, around this relationship, in your experience, your reflections, what key factors make an effective relationship between a main board and a trust board?
I think Gemma's actually touched already on one of them, which is the clarity of the responsibilities and roles, because the different parts of the governance structure, even in a very small company, have got a different purpose. And it's very easy for that to get blurred or not to be understood. And I was going to say people can play the system. That's not the best choice of words, but it means that people can get dragged into inappropriate discussions. It's not appropriate for a trustee, whether employee or independent or anyone else, to be involved in some of the other discussions. Trustees have a very particular role. So I think having clarity on what the responsibilities the different parts of the structure have is very important, actually. I think having the well-considered, and I've been taking notes as Gemma was talking, actually, because I think she said a lot of sort of powerful things. I think having clarity in what communications and reporting are appropriate and necessary, not too detailed, not too frequent, but not the other extreme either. Again, it makes things clearer and avoids scope for fallouts. So I think having clarity in what the different responsibilities are, people respecting them, and I think bringing it back to values, then it's down to everyone to make it work. And so having the values throughout the organisation emanating from the senior management team and leadership, but actually through the entire business, that we want to make this employee ownership work, and we're going to work together to do that. We all know how we can work together in relationships when we want them to work. We know how we can work together when we don't want them to work. And actually, one of the things that makes a successful employee-owned business is where everyone's pulling together and working together towards a common objective. And so the values of how we run our business, they've got to be lived values. Having a set of values on a page that we can refer to once a year and no one remembers or uses is pointless. Values need to be lived. They need to determine how we take decisions. They need to determine our interactions. And I think everyone pulling together and sharing that common set of values and wanting employee ownership to work is how you unlock it and how you make the relationships work. You're not always going to agree. And part of the role of the trust is to hold the board to account. Now, that can be done in ways which are confrontational, which is never the smart way to do it, or it can be done in cooperative ways. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. So you've got to ask the difficult questions and be willing to do it, but you've got to be able to do it in a way which is constructive and positive rather than negative, and a separate power base within the company. The trust should never become a separate power base. Okay,
fantastic. Thank you. What I'm taking from this is, and what we hear a lot of successful employer businesses that get this right at a time, it takes maintaining job descriptions. We talked about structure, job descriptions of roles, and also descriptions of the responsibilities of each of these bodies, and then that's clearly understood. Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to move us on to discussing the individual themselves. So that employee trustee. So what potentially makes a great employee trustee? So what do you see as the key competencies of an effective employee trustee, and why? Gemma, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've done a good job. What's that core come from?
I think someone that's very organised, someone that is very approachable, good at building relationships with kind of peers and kind of up. Ken just kind of touched on it then, somebody that possibly feels confident enough to challenge. Thankfully, I haven't had to have that situation yet. There's not been kind of any negatives where I've felt I've had to do that, but I have a really great relationship with our directors, and I would feel confident in possibly having to challenge on something that I didn't necessarily agree with. So I think you've got to have that. And the only other one I'd say is maybe kind of a bit of commerciality, so an understanding of financials, how a business runs, so that you've kind of got the best interest of the business at heart.
Okay, thank you. James, same question.
Sure. The first one I would maybe draw out, it actually builds on the last conversation where Gemma and Ken were talking about the need for clarity. And I think they were, in that context, they were absolutely spot on in terms of the need for it. Linking it to a skill and a watch out is the skill and the ability to hold ambiguity in the role as a trustee or a representative. So I think clarity is important, but the skill to not let it hold you back when you don't have it about the work that you're doing as a trustee is really important as well, in terms of how can you get really comfortable holding that ambiguity. So I think that would be the first one. The other two that I would call out, the first one would be critical thinking, because clearly being a trustee or a representative, it is literally a different type of thinking that you're trying to apply to the role that you have. So it can be about thinking about what's being said, what sits underneath it, what's not being said, how is it being said, what is the data that sits underneath the arguments that are being made. So it's a very different way of thinking, and again, just that'll mean different things for different people in terms of how confident they are to do that. But yeah, just to really put under the microscope, how do you think, how do you process information when you're in any key meetings as a trustee or a representative? And then I guess the last one is probably arguably quite a predictable one, quite a selfish one. It's about your resilience. That's a skill in its own right, in terms of how can you dedicate and invest time in yourself to build your resilience as you fulfill that role. Because many people on this call will say it's not easy in terms of the demands on your emotions and on your time, and being pulled into different directions in terms of your business as usual job, and then your trustee role as well. So having a sense as to, it doesn't necessarily need to be a plan, but having a sense as to how you build your resilience in the role as well, I would say is quite important.
Okay, thank you. And Ken, you've seen hundreds of employee trustees go through the course that you deliver. What have you seen of the key competencies required of those that are going to be successful?
I agree with everything that's been said already, but I'd probably add two, possibly three things to the list. I think the first one is understanding what the role is and what it isn't. Because when we put an employee-owned business together the first time, there's lots of boxes where we need to put people in those boxes to fill roles, to get the structure up and running. And a lot of people find themselves in the employee trustee role without really understanding what they're there to do. And I think being clear what the role involves and what it's responsible for and what it isn't, which is equally important, is a key thing. And it's quite liberating when you realise you're not there to keep an eye on everything in the business. You're not there to be an employee's advocate or a trade union rep to take things to the board and fall out with people. I think being clear what the role is and what it isn't is a key one. I think a little knowledge helps, and that was why we put the course together in the first place. To be a good employee trustee, you don't need to be a business expert. You don't need to have sat in a boardroom ever before. You don't need to have an MBA. You don't need to understand all of the complex ins and outs of how your business operates. But there are a few things you need to know. and advertisement coming up. If you're new to the role, I would recommend the course. Of course, I'd say that, wouldn't I? But I think the longevity of the course and the people coming through it and keeping coming back, we try to give you that knowledge if you're nervous about it, and I think it's worth doing. But I think the third thing is common sense, because you don't need to be an expert. You're not there to be an expert. You're not there to be a marketing guru or a finance guru. You're not there to know all of the ins and outs of how the business could operate. Common sense goes an awful long way in a boardroom. And that's true of an employee trustee, employee director. It's also true of independents. It's also true of many of our executive directors as well. A lot of business is really about common sense. And one of the things that's been sort of really positive to see, because we've had, as you said, Ollie, literally hundreds of employee trustees come through the course over the last four years or whatever, and they're a bright bunch of people. And doing the role, we're taking someone who would never be in a boardroom in many cases and putting them in a senior responsible position within the boardroom, and they fly when they discover their confidence, and when they realize a lot of it's about common sense. You don't need to do all the work yourself. You don't need to analyze things to the nth degree of detail, but actually having the confidence to give it a go and then apply common sense goes an awful long way. And I think that many of the most effective employee trustees we've seen coming through the sessions, they've not been the most expert. Many of them haven't been highly educated at school or degree level or anything else. That doesn't make a difference, actually. It's having the common sense and being able to apply that to a business in a sensible, effective way and manage the relationships. I think that's what makes them most successful.
Thank you. Advice to our audience: if you are looking at going through that election process that Gemma indicated there that she's gone through, or if you're looking to, especially when you recently become employee-owned, select and identify or nominate somebody. These are these key considerations you need to be thinking about. You want to avoid the popularity contest where we think so-and-so will be the right person in order to do the job because everybody likes them. That's great, but it might not be suitable for this role. It's so crucial and important. So thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next topic because there's quite a few questions coming through related to this. And this is the challenge of managing conflict. So you've got your employee trustee hat on and potentially a bit of conflict. You're listening to employee voice, you're feeding that through to the main board, and the main board are pushing back potential conflict. Let's just explore that and dig into it a little bit deeper because clearly it's popular. So Ken, I'm going to come back to you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What's your advice? You've alluded to this a little bit, but a bit more depth. A healthy culture where there may be conflict or challenge in an employer business.
I think the starting point has to be the board runs the business. That's fundamental. And so the board has been appointed to run your business. They've been appointed to keep an eye on all the moving pieces, and they've been appointed to take the difficult decisions where they're necessary. But being on the trust doesn't mean we're there to disagree with the board for the sake of it. And the board will often have to take unpopular decisions. I was reading some quotes yesterday from Chris McDermott from Cambridge Weight Plan, for instance, and he was talking about that the right decisions for a business are not always the popular decisions. And so the part of the challenge of being an employee trustee is to recognise when unpopular decisions are the right ones, and to be there and to support them and certainly challenge them, certainly explore whether there are different options available. But actually, when the board are doing the right thing in good faith for good reasons, actually you're there to support the board rather than to cut the legs from under them. And I think that's important because being in a senior management position can be a lonely place to be. And I think the trust has to support the board when it's doing difficult things. I think having the right relationships and having the trust and the values, again, makes that easier. If we are confident we're all on the same page, we all want the good of the business. We might disagree how we get there, but actually, if we are confident that everyone's doing the right things for the right reasons, even if because of their judgment or position or responsibility or background, whatever, they have a different view on the future, actually we need to respect that. But fundamentally, the board has to run the business, and conversations around that need to be managed in a constructive, positive way. Doesn't mean you always agree with them. It doesn't mean actually you just give them free rein and you're there to rubber stamp things either. And if you do disagree, you've got to be willing to stand up and do it. But you've got to do it in a constructive relationship and constructive environment where actually we respect that everyone's there to do the right thing.
Okay, so conflict is fine. So James, John Lewis, what insight, experience would you offer in how you manage that conflict and that challenge in a constructive way?
Yeah, I think Ken set this one up really well because it plays out in our organisation really vividly on a daily basis. So going back to what I said at the beginning, because we are challenging ourselves to work in as democratic a way as possible in everything that we do, we've got 76,000 employees, stroke partners, who rightfully expect to have a voice. So that can lead to lots of debates in the organisation about, oh, this is slowing us down, this is impractical. You know, someone needs to make the decision. You know, someone needs to make the decisions with purpose and authority, like what Ken's just described. So there's definitely a sweet spot to be found organisationally there. So things that we would hold really dear to our hearts is that you have a commitment that you're providing your workforce with as much knowledge as transparently possible about what's going on in the business and the organisation. You know, that should be the minimum of what you're doing in terms of whether it's business performance, how decisions are being made, what those decisions are. But then the second element, I guess, of that as well is that it's really important that you create the opportunity for the workforce overall to be able to input and shape decision making at the first earliest stage, because that will only mean that when the decision's actually made, there's a far greater chance it's been the right decision, and it's a decision that partners or employees will support. So again, it's an example of democracy in terms of input and engagement. It's a big commitment, but bringing people with you at the beginning and not at the end when it's a case of, oh, I don't like that decision, I've got a different one. There's an opportunity there. And the last thing organisationally, I guess, that I would call out as well is that it's so important that this is more of an expectation of leaders in your organisation. And you'll have heard psychological safety mentioned, I'm sure, in various guises before, but leaders have to create the conditions so that the workforce can feel natural and comfortable to bring a different view, to say something that's a little bit controversial, or to say something that comes from a minority group position as well. So if you're doing those things as well, that again reduces the I guess the frequency of that conflict. And Ollie, I apologise because I know I'm probably taking up too much time. If I could just also mention that beyond the organisational perspective, it's also about how, as a trustee and as a representative, you approach conflict itself. And there are clearly some clear things that you would want to consider. And my I guess my recommendation is that first and foremost is that you reframe it around, it's not actually conflict, it's a conversation with a purpose. And if you approach it with just a really curious mindset about, I've got a different position, I want to learn what yours is, let's have a really open conversation and approach it from that angle, that just kind of takes the tension out and the conflict and takes some of the emotion and personality out of it. But finally, as well, is how when there is conflict and you have to face into it, is just really thinking through your approach around what is the outcome I'm trying to achieve here? Am I being clear enough? Is there data or opinion that I'm basing this on, and what is that? So that it's as constructive as possible. So I think just really, again, thinking through your approach in advance, where you've got a clear example where you might be in an opposite position from another board or trustee member.
So Gemma, conscious you said that relationship has been positive. At Creed, you haven't come across situations of challenge at all. But briefly then, how have you got to that point where it's not deemed conflict, it's not deemed challenge?
Yeah, I think a couple of points that the guys have touched on. I think Creed are heavily focused on our values. They're such an intrinsic part of our day-to-day operation. We recruit based on values, we refer to them on a day-to-day basis. So that's something that's massive to us. And I think the level of comms that we've had with employees about the EO journey and the openness of the financials we're kind of all on that same journey together. Everyone's got this, we're all on the same road. We know where we're heading. We've got that common ground. And I think that's massively helped. So any board meetings that we've had and any decisions that we've been made, like I say, it's all been really, really positive. We've not had anything where we've had to push back and or I've had to sit in a board meeting and felt really uncomfortable and had to kind of have a difficult conversation. It's not something we've approached yet. I know we've been very lucky. We're still very new in our journey, so it's not to say that that's not going to come further down the line, but I do think those elements have really helped us and have been a reason why we've possibly not faced any major challenges.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to questions that I'm going to run through from those that have been submitted, James, to that topic of offboarding then, if I can come to you, because this is your area, do you mind just sharing those, summarising those key outputs that were discovered from the research?
Yeah, we'll do, Ollie. So yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, as a result of the research, it completely validated from those that had departed roles the experience that they had and had felt within the organisation. So that led us to a place of, so what, so what do we do about it? What's the right thing to do and experiment with? So as I said, we delivered a facilitated virtual workshop that focused on some key areas that we've learned from as well, and we've taken those away so that we can integrate those actions into how we manage this on an ongoing basis. Because I guess every 3 years we face into the same opportunity in terms of many partners leaving roles. So in terms of the workshop that we put on for those that had offboarded, we gave them an opportunity to think about how they could get closure, and that been a really natural beneficial first step, so that giving them the space to reflect on the role that they fulfilled, how that played through for them. So just basically the thinking space, which meant they could almost kind of draw a line in the sand and then move forward from that, and there wasn't any residual feelings that were left there. We encouraged them to gather peer feedback as well, so that from a strengths perspective they could really understand what they had done well, because I think we'll all know we do something and then we move on to the next thing really quickly. So in order to help them really understand which skills was it they leveraged or developed, we created that opportunity through them gathering feedback as well. What we then started to move to is to share with them a number of ways that they could be thinking around their ongoing contribution. So it became clear that by doing the role, you do learn new skills, you do have new experiences, and it's a waste for both the individual and the organisation if nothing else happens thereafter. So it's about bringing that individual's line manager into the conversation so that they can be supportive of them trying out new things, even if that means doing something outside of the organisation as well. Creating an environment where that's promoted as well is really important. And I guess the other aspect as well is, I guess, from an organisational perspective, so beyond being impacted in that way as an individual, if you're in a position of influence in your organisation, what the whole experiment showed us through the feedback is that offboarding is important, and it can make a difference. So, and you can decide as an organisation about what feels right for you, and in terms of the scale and nature of your organisation, because just doing some nice simple recognition for that individual is a good first step, but then from the workshop, creating the space for them to get into some of the more future facing kind of thinking also adds that value as well. So yeah, definitely something that's a choice you can make as an organisation, but a choice you make as an individual about how you take stock and get the best out of the experience that you've just had.
Okay, thank you. Thinking about this, it's you're unlocking the potential of the individual, aren't you? You're maintaining that going forward beyond just the tenure of which they have been an employee trustee. Fantastic, thank you. Right, I'm going to go to questions that have been flying through to my right-hand side. The first one was, Gemma, to you, if I can come to you. A minute circulated to all of the team for an employee trustee meeting?
No, not to the wider employees, and they're just circulated to the board. And then because, like I said, the financials are already shared separately. Anything that's discussed specifically around the voice forums, I then have a separate comms with everybody about that. So I kind of share that element of it, but anything else is just circulated with the board.
I would caveat to everybody how each individual organisation approaches anything in terms of employee ownership. It can be individual, it's flexible, in whatever situations or circumstances you've already got embedded and in place may well be working. It's the final, it's the output, it's the result that's important. The how bit, this is just reflections from others. And also there's a point here from Kevin, meetings 4 times a year for an employee trust board seems quite a lot. From my perspective of speaking to hundreds of employee-owned businesses, 4 is quite typical. Nods from the panel, would you say? Reflective probably of board meetings at maybe 4 times a year, employee trustee meetings, similar. All right, thank you. I'm flying through because I'm conscious of time and the number of questions that we have. How far in advance would you start the re-election process? When would you start the staff communications and that nomination?
With us being relatively small, we probably won't start that until, I would have thought, mid to end of November. And then the person will be in role as of the following 1st of January. So, but like I say, we're relatively small. So if it's a larger organisation, we would typically probably start that a few weeks earlier.
James, you've come off mute to answer from a larger organisation point of view.
Yeah, it's really apt because some of my colleagues are knee deep in that just now. So we would probably start a year in advance, and I get it is an extremity of being a larger organisation, which I get, but it's to help us understand almost what is it we're trying to achieve in that election campaign. How do we improve diversity of those who put themselves forward for the roles? What do we need to do to enable that to happen? So yes, some of it's driven by our scale, but it's also really thinking about, as an organisation, how, what does good look like, so that you're constantly modernising your approach and being as inclusive as possible to any election process.
Okay. Thank you. There's a point here that's echoed by a number of people. Struggling at the moment to keep the employee members satisfied with their thoughts and opinions. They are, of course, valued, but the board does have the right to make decisions. A slight power struggle at the moment. Any advice from any of you? Okay.
When I mentioned clarity earlier on, I think this is a good example. This is not an unusual situation. This is actually surprisingly common. And I think it's key to remember the board are there to run the business. Sorry, can you hear that ringing in the background? No. The board's there to run the business. And so becoming employee owned is not about us becoming a cooperative. It's not about having votes on everything that we choose to. It's not about the employees becoming in charge of everything. So having the clarity so people understand how the different parts of the structure will fit together is important, and being willing to communicate that, publicize it, and keep on reinforcing it. So people don't expect employee owners should be listened to, and they will very frequently have good positive suggestions to put forward, but they're not there to overrule the board. The trust isn't there to overrule the board. I mean, if you want to go into legals of it, the trust cannot tell the board what to do, particularly. Actually, the trust's power as shareholder is to fire the board. And so that dimensions where the decision making lies. The decision making is at the board. If the trust is sufficiently concerned about things, you can do a lot of things influencing by discussion and positive interaction. But actually, fundamentally, the trust is there just to keep the watching eye, to spot any big issues, and these are the big ones that will determine the future success of the business or not. That's what you're there to keep an eye on, not the minutiae. You're not there to try and influence that. And the employee stakeholders are potentially one step beyond that. They're there to contribute and share in the success of the business, but they're certainly not there to say we're going to have a popularity vote and decide we're going to have better coffee in the canteen or whatever else, because then that way lies chaos. You've got to keep the structures properly structured and distinct and be clear on the rules.
Thank you. And James, you referenced decision making earlier on in one of your answers to a question, and it took me to, there's a number of businesses that have a decision making flowchart. which is a visual thing, and it basically says, if you've got a question related to this or some feedback related to that, this is your route to communicate it. And then that's clear as to the roles within the organisation and where you can get your voice heard, depending on what the subject may well be. Here's a good question for you. Would the employee trustee attend company board meetings?
Shall I take that?
Yeah.
Fire away.
Yep, not as of right. The trust is a separate body, and the trustees are there to manage and run the trust. If it was helpful for your business to have the employee trustee also either a member of the board or in attendance at the board without being a full member, then you are free to do so. And I know a number of businesses that do that and find that very successful, and it opens up the communications for them, but you should not expect to attend the board meetings as of right.
Fantastic. And in answer to that question, some helpful insight from both Lisa Fryer and John Besant, who've echoed that point and given some advice as well in the chat. What if staff members disagree with the decision the board members are making? James, you're chuckling.
Yeah, it was more of a it was more of a smile, but yeah, I think it's you will know from external media that from a John Lewis partnership perspective, we've had to face into a number of really tough decisions in recent months, and within the organisation that can be difficult because some of these decisions are made by the board and some of them could be influenced by our council, both of whom have trustees and representatives on them. So and as I think Ken mentioned earlier on as well, there will always be multiple opinions, those who support it and those who don't. So it is really testing and challenging where there is disagreement. All you can do, I think, is to hold your nerve and at your best be really transparent and honest about why those decisions have been taken. So for just one short example where we've made changes a number of months ago to our redundancy terms and conditions, which made its way into the external press as well, and that involved decision making by a committee of our council, and it was really tough for those committee members because they became the face of that decision. One that many divided many partners. So you can work hard in terms of doing a vlog to share with partners to explain the processes that exist, why decisions were made. But yeah, it is difficult. So yeah, I think disagreement. It's just how. Yeah, it's how you can just be your best around it, knowing that it will always be there, and offer, clear, accurate, transparent information as much as one can.
Thank you. Next question. Would you say it's essential to replace the employee trustees regularly, particularly in a small business, in this case, 14 employees? And if so, how often? Gemma, I think you said your tenure is 2 years, but you can do a second term?
Yeah, I think I can put myself forward again. So to be honest, I don't know the rules and regulations around this, whether there's any particular set time that you have to adhere to, but our articles stipulate that we will replace every 2 years. And with me being the first one, we're kind of just finding our feet with it. But that seems to work for an organisation of our size. And then at the end of the term, if I'm not successful and somebody else comes in, we've got fresh kind of pair of eyes. Fantastic.
Final question that I'm going to end on here before we move into networking rooms. What type of business decisions the EOT board be involved in? We've covered some of that, but I think it would be helpful because we've talked about decision making and a bit around challenge, just to summarise that for us. So what key decisions would an EOT board be involved in?
Can I take that one?
Please do.
I think there are 3 levels of, not even decisions, but there's 3 levels of discussion that the EOT board can have. I think there are things that the trust board would want to be aware of, and that's not a consent, that's not a decision, that is potentially an important decision that the board are taking, that they say to the trust board, as the owner of our business, you should be aware that we're doing this. I think the second level of interaction is consultation. And so the board still take the decision, but they might have formal or informal conversations beforehand with the trustees saying, this is what we are planning on doing. What do you think? And so it's a different layer of interaction. And the third level of interaction is formal approval. And that is where the trust has set itself up and set the structure up in a particular way that the trust wishes to approve certain big decisions. Now, those will be rare. They will be the biggest and the most important decisions, but actually that will typically be things which are really fundamental to the health and the future and the success and the stability of the business. You can set your trust up and you can set your governance up to actually define what you want to be involved in at what level of that. So the EOT board should not be taking lots of decisions. It absolutely shouldn't be. It should be quite a rarity. But actually the ones that will get involved in will be only the most important, that it's already decided, or that actually, whether it's in your legals or not, whether the trust board and the board together have saying, well, actually, we'd like you to support this formally and take a decision to support this. But it should be a rarity for the trust to take a big decision on anything.
Gemma, James,
does that concur with how you run yours?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Right. Thank you very much for the questions that you've submitted. What we're now going to do is keep that conversation going. So if there's something that wasn't asked, I apologise for that, but now you're going to ask it directly to Gemma, to James, to Ken, but also to colleagues at the EOA that you can join the rooms of. You now have the opportunity to join the Zoom rooms. Everybody's quite familiar with how that works. So join a room, take part in discussion, ask some more questions. You can see that Ken, Gemma and James have got their own room they're going to be hosting. You can meet colleagues Fran, Joanna and Charlotte from the EOA to ask anything related to employee ownership. They will do their best to answer it or get the answer to you. And also our EO Learn training courses. This particular course might be of more interest. You can answer that. And if you're interested in our policy work, which is significant, our colleague Sam is available to answer any of those questions. So the rooms are going to open up very shortly. Choose which room you would like to go to, and please do keep the conversation going. I'll see you again very shortly. I'm going to emphasise some key points again to make sure you keep that conversation going. As members of the EOA, making sure you're making the most of your membership. So if we can just come to some slides, and as I do that, I'm just going to summarise what I've heard. Roles, structure, process, transparency of information that will help in terms of the decision making and clarity of where your voice can be heard and through the channel it's going to be heard, and values sit at the heart of that. Having the right people in the right roles and understanding everything is critical. So I talked about at the start, EO Learn as an opportunity to continue unlocking the potential of the people within your business, communicating your EO transition to the team. If you're nearly there or you're thinking about that, it's integral. We haven't really used the word communicating a lot within this, but we've alluded to it a great deal. How you communicate and understand employee ownership across your business is critical. How to create an engaged EO business. This particular course, which Ken has beautifully plugged, is a key consideration, we would say, for every business, and how to be an effective independent trustee. So this could be something you could recommend if you are sat on a trust board. And the next slide for me, please. These are the reminder of the meetings. We'll cover topics like this, but other general topics as well. For example, the one in London is going to be about accessing finance as an employer business for the transition, but also for growth. That's one of a number of topics that we're going to tackle. All of these meetings are filling up fast. Links to these are on our website, which if you go to employeenership.co.uk, you might notice it looks a little bit different. That's because we've launched our new brand and our new systems, which we're going to tell you more about tomorrow at People Powered Business. So you can join that event as well. So that brings us to an end. I would just like to again thank Ken, thank James, thank Gemma for your involvement. It's hugely appreciated. If you sat there thinking, I've got a story to tell, I'd like to do something like this as well, whether it's through an event or through a case study or a blog, whatever it might be, tell us, because we'd be delighted to put you on a stage in order to do that. So thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being involved. Hopefully we'll see you virtually tomorrow. And anything you've got to tell us about today, except that Zoom rooms didn't work, we've spotted that bit. Please do let us know with some feedback. But thank you very much indeed, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.